So, welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, at Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make resources such as books and courses and information for other potters who want to be more eco-conscious in their pottery practice but maybe don't know where to start or can't find out the information they need. So that's what this podcast is all about. It's about sharing everything I've learned along my eco-conscious pottery journey with you, and I can't wait to get started. So let's go. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about clay shrinking. Um, because, yeah, I remember when I first started making pottery in a pottery class, and someone said to me, "Oh, so when your clay, like the end thing that you make, when your clay is fired, it will be a different size. It will like have shrunk." And I was like, "What? What?" And I mean, now it kind of looking back, it kind of seems quite obvious because, that water's being lost from the clay, but it basically shrinks at every single stage of the making process. So at the when you're making it, it's one size. Then when the clay dries, it's another size. And then when you bits fire it, it's another size. And then the final firing, the final like glaze firing, it's a different size again, the finished pot. So yeah, that's what I thought would be really good, like episode to do, just to kind of talk you through like clay shrinkage and like what you can do to yeah, in terms of like your own thing that you're making shrinking, and yeah, some tips that I've learned. Okay, so yes, this is an extract from a Potter's book by Bernard Leach, which I really probably should return to the library soon. Um, so in this book, Bernard Leach says that shrinking. So this is in the sort of glossary appendix. Bernard Leach says during the process of drying, clays vary in their contraction up to a maximum of about 25%. So, okay, so this is interesting because it means that like different clays shrink different amounts, which is another kind of like variable. Like, I don't need this. I just want to make something and then I want to like know the size of it at the end. Say like you're making a mug, you're making a mug, you've made it the perfect size to have your like perfect cup of tea in, and then like by the end of the whole making process, it's like you've got this tiny mug and you're like, "What? Where's my nice big tea mug?" So, okay, so the way that you account for shrinkage is that you obviously need to make things bigger than you want to have them at the end. So but how do you know how big to make something? Okay, so that's where this like top tip comes in. What you need to do basically is, because every single clay shrinks at a different rate depending on like what it's made from, depending on how much, like say for example, if it's got sand in it or something, might shrink a bit less, or if it's a very, certain types of clay like will shrink more. So what you need to do every time you're using a different clay, ideally if you want to calculate exactly how much something is going to shrink by, is you need to make a test, like a special glaze test to calculate the shrinkage. And the easiest way of doing this is just to take like a rolled out piece of clay and do tests. So I'll show you a test that I've done with just a piece of clay that's like 10 centimeters long. So I'm just holding up one that I've made here. So this is the clay that I use, and I've doubled it up actually as a glaze test, a pottery glaze test for eco-conscious pottery color. But what I did on the back of this glaze test is it's just, yeah, so it's just, if you're listening on the podcast, it's just like a flat piece of clay. And what I did was I marked with a ruler, I just scored 10 centimeters, like a 10 centimeter length in that glaze test. Um, so, right. So that's what you're doing in the wet clay. So I didn't do wet clay. I did it when it was about leather hard because it's kind of easier to kind of score into and press things into if you wanted to like say exactly how long it was. Maybe you wanted to press like 10 centimeters in just to remind yourself like how long it was, or and it's much easier to score kind of like at the leather hard stage. So I waited till it was leather hard. I I then did it in this clay. So if you're doing it in wet clay, it would probably be, even it would probably shrink even more because or when it's leather hard, it's already lost some of that water. Okay, and then what I did was so we've got it measured, leather hard stage. We know it's 10 centimeters. And then what I did was I measured it at every stage of the process, of the pottery making process. So okay, and I wrote down exactly how long I remeasured it just with like a normal ruler and measured it. And um, in terms of centimeters, I did centimeters, millimeters. And okay, so when this clay was dry, so before it was bisque fired, it measured 9.3 centimeters. Okay, so you can see it already shrunk quite a lot between the kind of leather hard stage and then like the dry clay stage. And then when it was bisque fired, I measured it again when it came out of the bisque firing kiln, and it was 9.2 centimeters then. So yeah, that's quite interesting. I thought that was one of the most interesting parts of this test, actually, that it was not actually that different between dry clay and bisque fired clay. Um, yeah, 1 millimeter difference there. So, and then another really surprising thing about this test was then what I did was I measured it again after it had been glaze fired, and it was glaze fired up to stoneware temperatures. And yeah, at that point it measured 8.5 centimeters. So the final piece, yeah, went from 10 centimeters to 8.5 centimeters. So I got my calculator out and then I calculated that is a 15%. I mean, you probably can do that in your mind, in your mathematical mind, but yeah, I just wanted to make sure I got it right. So anyway, it was 15% decrease. In terms of like the size of something with the clay that I use. So, okay, so once you've got your test and you know how much clay is going to shrink by, you can then kind of make stuff, say, like, for example, 15% bigger or maybe 20% bigger. But yeah, it's really tricky because I think what happens is like, as a potter, you have this like natural instinct. You're like, when you're making something, you're like, right, that's the perfect size. It's the perfect size. Like I said, for my cup of tea, it's the perfect size. And then it's so weird when stuff shrinks. So in a way, it's like you've got to kind of like train yourself, like not like out of your intuition about like the size you want something to be, but I guess just the more things you make, you realize you just have to make things extra big. Or if you're making a specific thing, say for example, you're making like a planter or something, a pot that you want to like a certain plant pot or something to fit in, you're just going to have to like calculate how much bigger to make that thing to have that pot like fit in it. So yeah, it is a bit weird because you're kind of going against your natural like, oh, this is the perfect size kind of instinct, and just kind of like go even, make it even like 15% bigger. But yeah, it's good to know exactly how much clay shrinks by. Your particular clay shrinks by. So yeah, it's been really nice talking to you about clay shrinking. And like I said, it was so weird when I realised that something I made was going to be like a totally different size by the end. But yeah, just about got used to it now. So yeah, oh yeah, well, it's really nice to talk to you about clay shrinking, and wishing you very, very happy potting until the next episode of the Oxford Clay Pottery podcast. And until then, yeah, have a lovely week and I will see you then. Okay, bye. Oh, yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you're interested to learn more about eco conscious pottery or making your pottery more eco conscious and sustainable, there's so much for you on the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. I can't wait to see you there.